Exodus 17. It's so interesting. I've been singing, as y'all get it, I've been singing this song, Exodus. And I'm going to read the whole chapter, so, you can stand up with me for the you can sit for the first, 9, and then stand on the last 8, the 8. Amen? So you can sit for the first 9, and then stand with me on 8 through 16, the last 8 chapters. Amen? And those that want to stand the whole time, that's fine as well. It's not a problem. We learned in what was that? Ezra, Nehemiah, one of them, where they began to Ezra, where they began to stand in. Okay, Nehemiah. I knew it was one of them, and I'm in both of them right now. So, when you're between both, you're like, I never read it, but hey. So, amen. Amen. Exodus. Here we are. Exodus chapter 17. We'll start at the first verse, and we'll read on down to the 16th verse. Exodus 17, 1. And the word of the Lord declares, Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin, according to the commandments of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim. Pay attention to that word, Rephidim. But there was no water, and there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore, the people contended with Moses and said, Give us water that we may drink. So Moses said to them, Why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained. Look at this. And the people complained against Moses and said, Why is it you have brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said to Moses, Go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand the rod in which you struck the river, and go. Behold, I will stand before you on the mount in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and the water will come out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So he called the name of that place Messiah and Meribeth, because of the contention of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? I think it was something talked about trust this morning, right? Oh, okay. I'm just saying. They was walking all in it. We all on one accord. I'm just saying. Here we go, 18. Now Amalek came and fought. Amalek came and fought with the children of Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, Choose us some men to go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses said to him, and they fought with Amalek. And Moses and Aaron, look at this, Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hand became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hand on one side and on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called it the Lord my banner. Because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war. Pay attention to that word war. We'll have war with Amalek from generation to generation. You may be seated. You may be seated. I want you to get this in your hearing before you tell your neighbor this. I'm in the battle to win the war. So you can say to yourself first, I'm in this battle to win the war. Oh, y'all don't believe it. Okay, make a declaration and let the enemy know that I'm in this battle to win the war. Yeah, I think only about 2 people, so that means a lot of people are sinking in the battle right now. You know, you in this battle to win the war. Now you can tell your neighbor that if you're convinced of it. I'm in this battle to win the war. I'm in this battle to win the war. That's it, in the battle to win the war. And it's so interesting because as we begin to look at that, just a little history point, because I want to deal with the first segment of it before we deal with the last segment of it in the battle. And so it's so interesting because we see here that the children of Israel have gotten to a place where they have came from Egypt, and God had delivered them from Egypt, and now they have came through and they were delivered from the Egyptians, and we know that through the Red Sea, we know what had happened at the Red Sea, and the fact that they had came through the Red Sea, and coming through the Red Sea, God had begun to close up, as the Egyptians followed, closed them up in the Red Sea, and they began to die. So we know that happened, that begins to happen. And we also know that after that, you know, that there were songs to sing because the children of Israel began to see the death of the Egyptians wash up on the land and the shore. And so it was assured that God has brought us from, you know, the hand of the enemy that was on our trail, you know, and sometimes coming out of a place. And when you have been in a place for so long and you have been in bondage for so long, sometimes coming out of bondage, you know, the enemy will be on your heels when you come out of bondage because he knows now that he have lost something that is valuable and that's going to do damage to his kingdom. And so in the midst, he will be on the heels of it. So they realized that wasn't nobody there to do the work anymore. This was a people that now was released, and now they coming through some things. And in the midst of it, they began to go forward. But even in the midst of the hurdles, when you leave from a place, now this is so interesting, when you leave from a place of bondage and you on your way to freedom, you got to go through some things on your way to freedom. But in the midst of it, when you leave out of the place and when you take that step to say, you know what, I'm out of this now. I'm no longer walking this way now. There's a new journey for me. I didn't had an encounter. I know what I've been praying for has now happened. And now we are released from the bondages that are there. And now, you know, I am proceeding forward. You may run up against opposition. And the opposition in the midst of this time was not a person, even though they had people on their heels, but what was before them was a Red Sea that they didn't know how to get over. And it's so interesting, which is truth in the fact of in our own lives, when we come out of a place of bondage and we begin to walk to that place of freedom, we will run into some places where we just don't know how and what to do in the situation. But I'm so glad that it was at a point that Moses had to begin to depend on God, because he himself, though he was leading, still didn't know how he was going to lead the people through a Red Sea that was in front of them. But still and yet, Moses got to the place where he did move forward and thrust forward off of depending on God. Going to God, God giving him instructions that we know that he followed the instructions. But what happened if he would have just took the staff and waved the staff opposed to holding it up? What happened? But the fact of it is, instructions is so important, and I want to harp on that a little bit, especially when you're in the midst of battle, because you'll be going through some things, and you're in the midst of battle. You got to heed the instructions of God, and it is so key in the fact of you winning the war, because if you don't do it, then you'll wind up either struck or you'll wind up in a fatality situation, even in your spirit. And so you got to realize that even though they were going here and they went to the place and they came through. So they came through, God parted the Red Sea, and now they're walking through the Red Sea. And as they walk through the Red Sea, they go through on dry ground, come and cross it. And then we see that the enemy is on the hill. So the enemy's on the hills. The enemy is following after them on chariots and horses. And of course, at this point, it's to impute fear to get them to turn from where they were. So anyway, they get to the place. God shows up as a deliverer on their behalf, and he begins to close the Red Sea in the midst of all of them, the Egyptians and horsemen that have followed suit. Now, just a thought. What would have happened if somebody had been lagging behind because they don't want to move? Just saying. Just saying. Just keep in mind that. Just keep in mind that. And then we see that even coming through that, they come through the Red Sea, and after coming through the Red Sea, then we turn around and see that the next day that the Egyptians came, and when they washed up on the shore, that they began to sing, and it was a song, and they celebrated to see that God had truly been with them and delivered them there. And it's so interesting because then right after that, we see, right after that, about 15 days later, some days later, about 15 days later, we see that the children of Israel get to the place where they start complaining about things to eat. So now I've been out of my bondage for about 15 days. So about 15 days I've been on a journey, and I've been out of my bondage for about 15 days. And I'm expecting God to move because, it's 15 days. And he moved like that mightily. So surely I'm looking for him to move. I begin to miss some of the things I used to do. I begin to miss some of the things and some of the, what I used to eat. The children of Israel got to the place now that in 16 they dealing with the whole piece of complaining about them not having the meat and the bread. And sometimes when you come out of bondage, your mind is not ready to go with you into your freedom in the place of deliverance that God would have you to go. And so you still have a taste of things that you were doing. It still haunts you. It still, have a desire in your flesh to do some of the things that is done. And so in the midst of it, God is taking us through the wilderness experience, especially coming from deliverance and coming from bondage and going into deliverance. He take you through that so you can get your mind ready for the promise. And you got to realize, because in the promise, you don't have time to deal with some of the things that, you should have dealt with, because if not, it hinders the purpose and the will of moving forward, because now there are holdups in your life because of things that you have not dealt with. And even though God has a mantle upon you, even though the blessings of God is upon you, even though the purpose and the will of God is upon you, now you are battling here with your flesh because of things that I have not eradicated when I was in my wilderness experience. Oh, good God. So they hear, and they get to the place of complaint. So they're here at the place of 16 where they're complaining about the fact that, we don't have the meat. At least when we was in Egypt, we would have had some meat. We was in bondage, but bondage, I was used to it. You know what I'm saying? Some of the children, you got to understand their mentality, because some was born in that situation. So that's all that they knew. They knew that this is where I live. This is how we function. This is how I grow up. Some of us is born in dysfunctionality. Some of us know that, in the midst of it, this is how I came up, this is how I live, and this is what I do until the purpose of God is revealed in your life. And now things begin to change because you'll realize that where I was is what never I was supposed to remain in the battle to win the war. So they hear and they want to get to the place where they, hey, God don't have a problem with that, because he knows that they're new to this thing. He knows that coming out of it, your mentality is still your mentality. But your mentality is not an excuse for you to continue in your behavior. Your mentality is your mentality, but it's not an excuse to continue in the behavior. And so it's at a point where God begins to show you, because he's showing you that he's with you. And when he shows you that he's with you, he's showing you that he's with you. But they still at a point where they're not convinced, because they don't have, as Minister Terry said, the trust is not established yet. So they're not convinced of the fact that, you know what, they are, God is with them as they're with them, because they begin to challenge Moses and the things that are going on. That's so interesting, because they were convinced when they were leaving their bondage. It's so interesting. When you leave a place of bondage, you're so convinced that you have had an encounter with the Lord. When you leave in a place of bondage, you're so convinced that God has called you from that place and he's taking you somewhere else. You're convinced that you have had an encounter. You're convinced for the purpose and will of your life. And if anybody questioned you in that moment, you would tell them God said. And in the midst of it, you are in a place where you're convinced. But it's when you get to the place where you're in a drought season, or when you get to the place where you're in an unknown season, or when you get to the place that you're in a new season, that your faith begins to waver, and now you're questioning your ability. Was it God or not? But one thing they couldn't deny is that the Red Sea happened. So before they got to the place to complain about what they didn't have, the Red Sea had already happened. So now they're at a place, God begins to give them manna, and he gives them manna. He understands what's going on, so he begins to drop manna and give them manna. And what's so interesting, even in giving them manna, he gave them instructions, but we know that they didn't heed the instructions of what God was saying to them. And because you got to understand this, and I was looking at this, and you got to understand, when you come out of a situation of bondage, especially when you don't know what your tomorrow is going to hold. Because sometimes in bondage, I may be homeless. All right. I may not know that I'm going to have a next meal. So whatever I gain, I store up so I can have it for the next day. Or I can have it when I'm hungry. So whatever I gravitate to, whatever I get, I begin to hoard. Because bondage will teach you nothing else but to begin to hoard what it is. Because I need to make sure that my tomorrow is assured of. So I make provision for my own self, for my today, that my tomorrow may be, assured of. But in the midst of it, and looking at that and beginning to see that, when you're walking with God, he wants you to let go of that. Because you got to realize that in the midst of this, he's teaching them to trust me day by day. Day by day. Trust me day by day. Don't hoard it. Don't take it. He tell them with the manna, don't do it. Don't take all of that stuff and don't do all of those things. Just get what you need. Some gather much, some gather little. But whatever it was sustainable for their need in that day. So that means whatever they had was sustainable for their whole household. Everybody was full. The need was met. It was sweet to them in the taste. And so in the midst of it, they was fulfilled with what they had. But it came a point where God said, don't hoard any of it. Don't have none left over. And in the midst of it, they did anyway. And for those that it did, it produced something that wasn't good. So it was worms that came out of it, and it stink that came out of it. Because when you coming out of bondage and you are in the wilderness, you got to realize that God wants you to depend on him. Because if he's the God that brought you out, he's going to be the God that see you through. And so you got to trust him in the midst of the battle. So the worms came out of it, and it stunk. And the instructions was given again. Yes, that's right. And it stayed for 2 days, only on the Sabbath. On the Sabbath, they was allowed to gather more. Because they was allowed to gather before the Sabbath, so they was able to, no longer work on the Sabbath, because he wanted them to honor the Sabbath. And so even in the midst of it, and it's so interesting, because he's doing this and he's teaching them something, because the commandments is coming down the pipe, y'all. So he's showing them already of how to take a rest. Because you got to realize something, being in bondage, you don't rest. A lot of times you're running. Come on, when you're in bondage, distractions have you going, people have you going, stuff have you going, and you all on the move. You want some rest. You want to like, can I get away? Can I get a break? And you constantly on the move. Your mind is constantly going. Your body is weary and tired. And when you do eat, you eat, and you want to sit down for a minute. You sit down for a minute, but you're back up again. And even in your sitting down, your thoughts are still roaming through your mind. And now you're moving on what you got to do on your tomorrow, what you got to do on the next day after that, what you got to do on the next day after that, while you're still doing what you're doing even now. And so in the midst, you're toiling and you're going through, and in the midst of it, you're moving. You don't have a time to sit down and think, and you barely have a time to sit down and pray. And in the midst of it, your prayer seems something like, okay, God, can you help me? But still and yet, you're still toiling. You're still moving. You're still going about. And in the midst of it, God wants us to take a break and depend on Him. Depend on Him. And so we get to the point here that after that happened, now we at 17. And 17 is so interesting because we have a congregation of people that have came through the wilderness. We have a congregation of people that have seen God rain manna from heaven, and now they're at a place where they're thirsty. And they're not thirsty for a man, but are thirsty for a woman. I think that's the terminology they use now, right? Thirsty? They want some water. They want some water. And so it's so interesting being here and being in this place that they come to the place, and the children of Israel come to the place, and they're at this place camped at Rephidim. Well, Rephidim is significant, and the word Rephidim means rest. So they come in, and you got to realize from them coming to this place, because we got to understand where they are, because we're saying, wow, they shouldn't have complained. But I tell you, we do the same thing too when it comes around to consecration. All right. Let June hit, and you got to give up some meat. Let June hit, and you got to let go of the sweets and the bread. Oh, no, I can't do that. I got a headache. Oh, Lord, I can't. Let the fast take place. Oh, I just want to help y'all out so we ain't just busting them out and judging them without looking. I'm just saying. Get to the point, call a fast, and we be like, Jesus, help me. I'm delusional. I'm dizzy. Oh, I'm going to pass out. Oh, my God, I don't think and God is calling you to go on a fast. Don't you know that He will sustain you through that thing? Yeah, trying to get away with it all. Do you got something else? Can we eat this too? What about this? I get all kind of phone calls. Can we eat this? Can we eat that? I want to say to you, can you just pray and trust God? They get to the place, but I want you to see, because they're not the only one feeling. Look, they was here, but we be, come on. God be like a fast. You be like, what? You be ready until He say a fast. The word fast come out, I tell you, your body get to saying, why we going to give up that? Why we going to give up this? Why you going to let that go? You know how you going to function with this? So the war begin. But they hear, and they're in this place, and they're in a place called rest, and they hear. And so now they're at a place where there's no water there to drink, and you got to realize where they were. They were set out to do a journey. The journey from the wilderness, from where they came from to going to where they were, was 50 miles. So they're walking 50 miles, y'all. So you can get a little parched going somewhere for 50 miles. Some of us, if we walk to the corner, we're a little parched. You know, you go to the corner, you're like, whoo, don't let me get the shouting up here. I'm really going to you give me some water. You know, you're really on the point. So you got to realize 50 miles, they're in a place where they go, and they're at this point where they begin to get to the place where they wanted water. So the water wasn't uncommon of what they wanted, and it wasn't unreasonable. You know, it wasn't unreasonable that they wanted the water, but it was the way that they went about desiring the water that became a little contentious. You know what I'm saying? Because it was like, hey, they began to blame and say, hey, you brought us out here, and you bringing us out here to kill us and kill our kids, kill our cattle, and all this, and you don't believe after they just seen the blessing. You know, we just seen a blessing in a move of God. We just seen manna. And true enough, if God then rained down manna, then we believe about water. I just wonder if the approach was different when they asked for the water. I just wonder how this would have played out. Because in the approach of it, if it would have been different, the fact of it is we know that God has Moses. We know that God just rained down manna, and we know that we was complaining about that. But we here in a place thirsty. We've been walking for 50 days, and we're thirsty, our cattle and everything. We come to a place thinking that we're going to have water, and only to get here that is a drought. And so we're trying to figure out where we're going to get water in the place. We need some water. I'm thirsty, whatever the case may be. And so just with them, they got to the place where they were contentious. They got to the place where they were angry because it's now I'm in a place where I'm irritable. I'm irritable because what I thought, oh, good God, let me tell you something. When you come out of your situation or when you come out that place, you expect things to be a certain way. Come on. When they came from there going to the promised land and in the midst, I'm quite sure they thought that they had already in their mind perceived what it's going to be like. I know that I'm going to have everything that I need. I know that my provision going to be made of. I know that whatever stands before me is full. It's like, come on, we didn't draw all of what we wanted to be. And then only to get to the place of the situation when we moving in to see that ain't none of that happened. Oh, it irritates us. You can't say that it won't irritate you when you have your perceptions a different way and your mind is set on the things and what you have in your heart, and only get to a place not to see anything looking like what you thought it was. You questioning the fact of what's going on. You looking at how you going to get it. There's no resource for them to get water. You got to understand they're here in Rephidim, but there's no resource. There's no river they can go to tap in. There's no well that they can dig to bring up water. And we know that because God himself provided the water. Woo. Which means in your situation and in your circumstance, when it look bleak and ain't nothing around and ain't nothing you can do, but you know that God told you to do it, you know that God told you to move in that direction, then what you got to do is look to God for your help and your source and know that there is instructions that God will give that will bring you through. He already provided everything that you need. So it's very important because in the midst of here, it can be very discouraging. Now, they don't know that, they're going to go through a battle. Could you imagine battling? They're already complaining, but not knowing that a battle is coming up. I tell you, sometimes in your complaint, open up some things and open up some doors for your battles. I'm going to say that again. Sometimes complaining, murmuring, opens up the door for your battle. Doesn't mean that you won't defeat the battle, but it opens up the door for your battle. Meaning that you begin to battle mentally. You know what I'm saying? Because now we're at a place that you begin to think the way and behave in the way that you're thinking. So now you have a negative connotation of how you look at things. And we know that because I can say, oh, it is sunny outside. And you'll say, yeah, the sun, but it's going to rain in a minute. It's something. It's always contrary. Oh, yeah, the food, that food smell good. Yeah, the food smell good, but you know what? I'm so sick of eating. It's something, but it's something in a negative connotation. That is a mental battle that is now taking place. And what has to happen, or what does happen a lot of times, that God will begin to open up a door and allow a battle to take place to refocus your thinking on him. Because he wants you to see the things that are for you, and he wants you to understand that if he's for you, then who can be against you? And so in the midst of it, even with the children of Israel being where they were and in the position that they were, they came to the point where they praised in 15 and 16. They got to complaining about not having the things that they desire. We wanted the leeks and onions. I tell you, the leeks and onions was a fast, y'all. They didn't have no meat. That's consecration. But they get to the place where they have now, they wanted what they had in Egypt. You begin to have the taste of your old life and want the old life back. Because right now I'm not being fulfilled. It doesn't move me no more. Walking with God, I'm here, but it was okay for a minute. But now I'm not feeling the effects that I felt before. I'm not feeling, and that's the key word, feeling. I'm not feeling. But this walk is not about a feeling. This walk is about you knowing and having a relationship with God. So even when you don't feel it, it still means that God is with you. So it's not about how you feel. That's why you got to serve God when you feel good, and they got to serve God when you feel bad. No matter what goes on, you still got to serve God, because your emotions will tell you some things that is not true. But I tell you, when you stand in your spirit, then you lean the way God have you to lean. So no matter what it looks like, no matter what it feels like, you still stand your ground. You got to realize that their soldiers in the battle have to stand their ground. Some may have fear in them. Some may be at a place where they get all kind of things around them. They can't pay attention to how they feel, but they got to keep their eyes on their commander to get the instructions that is needed, that they know they're in the battle so that we can win the war. 8. Now let's get down to the war. We have to get to that because I want to go through all that because you'll have a lot of discouraging things that happen before you get to it. See, that's how you'll tell that you know what, you need to prepare for battle because it just keep hitting you. Some keep hitting you from the left, some keep hitting you from the right, some keep hitting you. And you're like, what in the world? It just keep coming, keep coming, keep coming. But it's coming because it's making you want you to be prepared for what is the battle that is about to come. So you got to be ready. It keep hitting you so you can go into prayer. It keep hitting you so you can read your word. It keep hitting you so you can build your faith. It keep hitting you so you can stand your ground. So when you in the midst of battle, you can be able to be focused and knowing that it is God who have me. And when I know that God got me, I know that I will come out and I will come through this thing. So I begin to trust God even though it looks crazy. In the midst of it. So they get to the place where they're there and they're resting, y'all. They're in a rest place. 50 miles of a journey, then come through. Then it came through 50 miles. God did open up and give them some water. And now they're resting. And you know how it is when God moved and you done got your blessing. You praising God. You okay with it. And there ain't nothing wrong with that. You know you in a position where God has blessed you indeed. And now you at a place where you're resting because the thing that you asked God for is done. And now the thing that you asked God for is done. Now you're at a place of resting. But you got to be on alert and know that when you came into this thing, you done just enlisted in a battle, but you were enlisted in a war. Meaning that a war is ongoing until the end of that thing, until the demise of everything that's in it that is against you. So you are in a war. And so in the midst of it, you got to realize that here, they resting. I got my water. I'm good. We get manna, I'm full. Everything, everybody happy, we clapping. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We praising. Yeah, 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 yeah. God's got a blessing. Woo! With my name on it, I'm happy. My name on it, and we play. And up come the enemy. In the midst, up come the enemy. Then praised and did all that, and up come the enemy. The children of Israel was at the place of rest of Rephidim, and now here comes the enemy. I tell you, the Amalekites came, and now that they're there, they're at a point where they come up to attack them. Now, should I remind you, they minding their own business. And you got to know, and what you got to keep in mind, even though God would allow this to happen, you got to keep in mind something. You got to keep in mind that you always got to be on alert because you're in a war. You can't just, when you get through with one battle, you got to keep your mind on God so he can keep you prepared for the others that's to come. Because you accomplished one battle don't mean that it's over yet. You got to stay focused and you got to keep your mind on Christ. That's why when he comes in on attack, and when we caught off guard, we only caught off guard because we have not been in the presence of God. But when you stay in the presence of God, he will not make you ignorant to the devices of the enemy, and he will show you everything and expose what is coming up before you. So now you are in a place where you're ready to do battle as God would have you to do battle. And in the midst of it, you can defy some thoughts that come to your mind and shut it down. You can defy some words that come to you and shut it down because God has given you the authority. But you got to realize you can't just stay focused on the battle, but you got to know that you're in a war. You're in a war. I'm in this thing. Though I'm in a battle, I'm going to win this war. Because a battle, you got to understand, that takes place of combat. That can take place between two. I'm in a battle. But there's a war all around. Believers, we're in a war. We may have our individual battles, but the battles come to build us up so we may have even greater faith to win the war. Yeah. And so you got to know that even though you're in the midst of the battle, God has some things for you that he needs you to get. So if you keep coming around to the same battle, I'm going to pause there for a minute as I go through your mind. If you keep coming around and you got the same battle, I would encourage you that this time, as you hit your knees in prayer and lay out before God, and he begin to speak to you, follow the instructions. Because if you're coming around to the same battle, I can guarantee you that you're missing the instructions. When you looked at the children of Israel and how they battled in certain battles, it's only because it was something that wasn't right when they lost the battle. And so here you see that in the midst of it, they get to the place where here, some things happen. Where Moses, and this is very interesting to me, because we get to the place here, and it says here, so Moses says, as the Amalekites come out to fight Israel at Rephidim, at their place of rest. Come on, the enemy will fight you at your place of rest. And so as they come out to fight you, or came out to fight the children of Israel, Moses said to Joshua, choose some men. Now these are men that have been griping, complaining. Come on, we finna go out and fight. Choose some men. Choose some men. Choose some men to go out and fight with the Amalekites. Choose some men. He tells Joshua to do this. Choose some men. And tomorrow, he said, I will stand at the top of the hill, with the rod of God in my hand. You see that instruction there? It's so important. You see that? He said, choose some men, number one. Choose some men. He said, tomorrow we're going to go and handle the business. So guess what? Look at this. Even more so what Joshua did. So Joshua did. He didn't do it his way. Joshua did as Moses said to him. And obedience is so important when you are in the midst of the battle. It's not about what you think, it's what God says and who God uses to speak into your life. The reason that many people, many believers are in situations and constantly going round and round because they don't want to listen, they don't want to follow, they don't want to do. But it's not until you submit yourself that God will begin to move on your behalf. I tell you, if you continue to go forward in the way that you go forward, you'll find yourself depleting out in the battle. But you got to be able to go forward and hearing the instructions of God for your life. It's for your life. It's for your life. So he gets to the place here, and it says so interesting that Joshua did exactly as Moses said to him and fought the Amalekites. And it says there's three people, Moses, Aaron, and Hur, went up to the top of the hill. Now I find it interesting. Moses goes up to the top of the hill because, at this time, Moses, according to Jewish tradition, is about 80 years old. So, you got to be using wisdom. So you take wisdom. He said, I'm going to go on up to the top of the hill. Then he take Aaron, according to Jewish tradition, is 83 years old. Then he pulled in Hur, who is known, age is not known, but indicates that he's a grandfather. So we can say that he probably was up in age as well. And what I find so interesting in this connection, you got a brother and a brother. And this third individual, according to Jewish tradition, is a brother-in-law. So according to that, he's the husband of Miriam. So you got them standing up here, and they're on top of a hill, and Moses is using what is in his hand. And so it's so interesting because as you see, Moses gets to the point here to move forward. And as he moved forward, it says that with the rod that God has given in his hand, Moses has used the rod to open up the Red Sea. Moses has used the rod for the water at this juncture. And now Moses is using the rod for the battle here that is going forward. Now, what's so interesting in here is that indicating that when the rod was lifted up. I don't know if y'all got that. I'm going to stay right there for a minute. Bible scholars in the room should have got snatched that revelation. When it's lifted up, in the midst of the battle, when it's lifted up, they were winning. But when it went down, they began to lose. When they went up, they win. But when it went down, they lost. Then they got to the point where they had to prop his hands up so that they can win. I tell you, it is so key, because a couple of things come to mind here. In the midst of your battle, don't lose your praise. Don't lose your praise in the midst of your battle. When you're in the midst of the battle, you praise even harder, and you praise harder, and you go forth in the midst of your battle. Don't lose your praise in the midst of your battle. Then another thing you got to realize, he said, if I be what? I'll draw. So you got to understand that in the midst of the battle, when God is lifted up and when he is doing what he's doing, then he's already working. He's already summoned the work to be done. But your role to play in it is to keep your eyes on him and to continue to stay focused in the midst of the battle. So what? The battle is the battle. You were equipped for the battle. You done prepared for the battle. You done been through a spiritual boot camp. You were able to sustain. You were able to gird your loins. You were able to hold up. We got to be believers today that would know that even in the midst of the battle, that I got to stay focused on God. Now this is so interesting, because in the midst of this battle, you got to understand that it went on for generations to generations. But we got to understand something. What we got to understand is that when we're fighting and we're fighting a battle, you got to realize that in the midst of fighting a battle, your mind has to be ready for the battle. And a lot of times your mind get ready for the battle as you continue to go on and to continue to seek God, in the will of God for what you're in. So in fighting a battle, you got to identify 3 people in a battle. It's important that you identify these 3 people. When you're right in the midst of the battle, you need to know that there are 3 people that are existing, or 3 persons, or 3, individuals that are located in a battle. The first individual in the battle you got to focus on is your commander. Because it is so important that in the midst of it, the commander play a role in giving you guidance in the battle. And then what happens is you would have, and it's so interesting because you need to be in tune to hear the voice of the commander. For the Bible says in John 10:27, my people know my voice, and another one they won't follow. So that means even in the midst of all kind of chaos, I'm still able to hear God. One of the things believer asks most often is, how do I know that I'm hearing God? Well, you will begin to know that you hear God and know the voice of God the more time you spend with God. Whether you spend with God in his word or you spending time in prayer, you will begin to hear God and know God for yourself. And it's important to know that, because you got to realize if you carefully listen to what is being, and this is Exodus 23, Joshua says this. Moses says this, Exodus 23:22. If you listen carefully to what he says, this is what he repeating what God says. If you listen carefully to what he says, then I will do what he says. Okay? And he said, I will be an enemy to your enemy and oppose those who oppose you. The key point of it is a commander is there, and it's important for you to see that in the midst of the commander, that it's important for you to listen and take heed. It is so key to be obedient to the will of God, especially in the midst of the battle. You're in the battle to win the war, but it's very impossible for you to do that when our ears are closed off to the commander. You got to realize that God has people in your life for a reason. It's not by accident that you're drawn to those that are around you. It's not by accident that God put spiritual people in your life. It's not by accident. God put it in your life for a reason. God give people to steward over your soul for a reason. He can do it himself, and he does do it because he's watching everybody. But in the midst, it's important that being blood-washed believers, that we know how to follow. Even Jesus himself submitted himself. He submitted himself to some things that were going on, and he, being God in the flesh, submitted that he may conquer all sin in the midst of what is going on, that we may have a life. And so it's important. Man, it's so important. It's so important. Why is it so important? Because you got to realize that the commander has the battle plan to win. And guess where he gets that from? He get it from the general. So the commander gets the battle plan from the general to win the battle so that they can win the war. Helping y'all do something here. Woo! So it's so important. And so the commander is a person that you need to be in tune with. Then the next person that you need to look for and watch for is your fellow soldiers. There are fellow soldiers that's in the midst of your battle with you. You got to understand, they may not be directly there, but it's a war. That's why we can look at it and say, when you're going through and man, it hit you, man, it hit me too, man, that hit me too. That came to my house too, because we're in a war. And so the enemy wants nothing more but to discourage you. So your fellow soldiers are there to encourage you. Because the Bible says that one can put 1,000 to flight and two, 10,000 to flight. Which means this, and I love the way that it's spoken of, and when it said here in the midst of Joshua 23:10, it says it like this: one can put 1,000 to flight because the Lord, your God, fights for you. Joshua 23:10. I'm going to say that again. One can put 1,000 to flight because the Lord, your God, fights for you. It's important to understand that when we end this, we can't do this alone, y'all. We may be hit individually, but when you hit, I should feel it too, because it's an impact to the kingdom. It's an impact to the kingdom. And so many people don't have it because we're in a society where we're doing us. We're in a dispensation where I'm doing me, and it's about me, and it's about me, my foe, and no more. But the truth of the matter of it is, you can't stand by yourself. Even when you out there and you in battle, even when you in the midst and you in the world, you still didn't stand by yourself. When it came to you handling a business, you didn't stand by yourself. In this, we don't stand by ourselves. We come in and we're ready to do battle. So you got to realize you got to look out for your fellow soldiers. So when you're in the midst of this battle, you got your commander that you taking heed to and looking for the signs and the voices that is going on, you know, the instructions that is given from there. And then at the same time, you're looking at your fellow, you know, soldiers that are around you. You want to make sure that you don't strike your soldier, the fellow soldier, while you're in the midst of your battle. Because I'm feeling all jacked up don't mean that I need to go off on you. Because I'm hurting don't mean that I need to cause you pain. I can't be in that situation. So it's so important that in the midst of the battle that you don't strike your fellow brethren and sister. That's why your instructions got to be on the Lord at all times. Your ear got to be inclined to his mouth, to hear the instructions. And then the last is you got to watch out for your enemy. In the time in which we live, many people are getting bamboozled by the enemy. And the reason that we're getting bamboozled by the enemy is because we got so many distractions going on. And because of the distractions that are going on in the life, it calls you to be thrown off guard and thrust you into some things where now you got to start swinging. You can't use your skills when you fight. Some people got skills when they fight. Some people know how to throw them jabs. Some people know how to throw those things. They got skills when they fight. But when you just get attacked, you start swinging all kind of crazy. You don't even think about the skills. You just know that you just got to start swinging. You just hitting everything in post. You don't care who's in the way. Everybody about to get in. It don't matter. You just going. You get to doing stuff that you get to scratching, biting, everything. Everything go when you got attacked, because now you done lost the concept of the battle, how to fight it. So now you go straight into survival mode. And whatever it takes to survive, I'm coming out of this, whatever it takes. Look, they ain't going to take me alive. Whatever happened, they ain't taking me alive. Because I done went into that. Why? Because what happens is, and this is a key point, we're so distracted that we don't see the enemy coming. If we watch animals, we'll see it. For the lion, male lion, roars. And when he roars to scare the prey. But then on the flip side of that, you got the lioness who's waiting for the prey, because she's the hunter. The lioness is the hunter. So her job is, when he roars, he's in one direction roaring, so they running from him into the lioness. And the lioness is smooth with what she does. She got skills. She calculates good. And she know at the right time to get the prey. No matter what size it is, she'll go after it. She sizing up which way she gonna go and which way she gonna take down the prey. And so in the midst, she positioned herself not to be seen or heard. Her breathing become very shallow in the midst of it, because she don't even want to scare the prey away, because she wanted to be at a point where she's able to accomplish what she needs to accomplish. Woo! I tell you. And when he roars and that prey get the running, she take her position, pounce, and take it out. Distractions is a roar like a lion, but the enemy is lurking and waiting for you to make your move. Because in the midst of distractions, you'll make an impulsive decision, and that impulsive decision will cause you to be tangled up and wrapped up, and you run right into that battle and hit, and now you got to fight for your life. You're fighting. You're fighting for your mental capacities. You're fighting for your family. You're fighting. And so it's so important for us to understand that you got to keep watch on your enemy. For we have to know, because at the same time, God has given you the authority to dismantle the weapons and gain ground needed for the battle, so that you may win the war. So we got to know that even though we're in the midst of the battle, we're in the midst of the battle to win the war. So I may be going through, but I got to refocus. And I got to take heed to the instructions that was originally given to me, so that I may win this one. I got to know that my brother and my sister is not around me to harm me, but they're around me to help me. I got to know that I got to keep watch of the enemy, and I got to watch out for distractions that tells me that I need to be isolated. Because that's a tactic of an enemy that is going forth like nobody business. I can get church at home. Well, yeah, you can get a word at home, but you lack the fellowship. You can get a lot at home, but the fact of it is you lack the fellowship. So when you get to going through in the battle, then how do you get through it? It's a reason that we are assembled together. Where do your strength come from? Who you accountable to? With no accountability, then I wonder, how do you think you can get through this alone? Oh, well, I'm accountable to God. You are. We all are accountable to God. But God's structure was put in place for a reason. And if he wanted it that way, individualistic, then he would have had it that way. But he always wanted a congregation of people. So how is people going to be outside of the body thinking that they are supposed to be of the body? The Bible says that we are many members, but one body. You play a role in the body. Isolation will cause you to die. Isolation will cause you to die. Isolation will cause you to die. Because the enemy is seeking to devour you. With unity, there is nothing the Bible says that man can't accomplish. And it's so important, because that's what is being so fought. Everybody wants their own individual views. Keep on reading as the children of Israel came out, and you'll see some Dathan and some Korahs and some Nadabs and Abihus They had their own individual thoughts. And it's not that God didn't speak to them, because he did. But it cost them. And everybody that followed, it cost them. He opened up the ground and swallowed them up because they didn't take heed to the full instructions and was fighting against one another, fighting against the work of God through Moses and Aaron, fighting against it. But still and yet, we hear God too. Yeah, you do hear God. You do hear God. But you got to learn to follow. Everybody is following somebody that God has put over them. Children, obey your parents. But they hear God. But children, obey your parents. There's always accountability. And when we stop being accountable, then we set ourselves up to be wrecked in the battle. We're in the battle. To win the war. And I'm telling you, simple things. Follow the instructions. Follow the instructions. I'm telling you, it'll take you further than where you think you should go.